All right, so today we're starting our new series on Moses. And if you have a Bible, I'll invite you to flip over to Exodus chapter 2, which is where we're going to dive in. And I want to start off with this. If you've ever observed someone walking a dog, anyone seen someone walk a dog? Okay, good. We all have similar experience there. If you've ever seen someone walking a dog, it usually occurs in one of a few different ways. Sometimes we see the dog dragging the person, right? And this is a common experience where the person at the other end of the leash seems to be along for the ride, and the dog is kind of in charge, right? Or at least the dog thinks they're in charge. The other thing that we'll sometimes see is the opposite situation, where the person is constantly yanking on the leash because the dog is distracted with other things and is not interested in the walk. They want to investigate other stuff, right? And so they're off distracted and not in step with the person. There's probably other things that might occur in a walk with a dog, but the last one is this, that I see, is that once in a while you'll see a dog that is so in step with the person walking it that the leash is more of a formality than a necessity, right? And that dog has been trained, right? And it's a thing of beauty. Whatever the person is doing, that dog stays right in step with them. It's a relationship that was built over time. It required training and discipline, but the synchronization in the absence of conflict is a beautiful thing to behold. You've seen this, right? If this was a picture of our relationship with God, what kind of dog are you? Are you charging ahead, trying to get ahead of God, and you're kind of frustrated that He's not moving at your pace? Are you distracted, off doing your own thing, and God's going, come on? Or are you in sync with Him? Learning to walk with Jesus can be a challenging thing for any of us. We have a tendency to feel like Jesus isn't moving fast enough, or He's dragging us into something we're not ready for. But here's the deal. To be a leader that Jesus is able to use for His kingdom, we must learn to walk in step with Him. Are you walking in step with Jesus? This is what we see beginning to unfold in the life of Moses. As we start this series on him, we're watching Moses trying to learn how to walk in step with God. And it's not really very pretty. In fact, it's kind of a disaster. But God has a plan for Moses, and Moses has to learn how to walk with God so that he can lead a nation. And there are many things that we can learn from the story of Moses so that we too can learn to lead well. So we'll be unpacking some of those important lessons over the next, actually, couple months. But today we're going to look at this idea of God's will, my way. And we'll see that Moses is not really in sync, not well. So let's kind of paint the picture and get a little history of what's going on here, a little context for what we're about to see. So you have a bunch of generations that have occurred since Abraham. Abraham was the first person that God kind of said, come, walk with me. I'll be your God. You can be my people. You'll have descendants as numerous as the sand on the shore. And from that, you have Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob, and then Joseph. And Joseph is the one who was, hated by his brothers and sold into slavery in Egypt. And then he saved Egypt by God showed him that there was going to be a famine, and he stored extra food. And he was basically number 2 in all of Egypt, which was pretty awesome. So he ended up bringing his whole family to Egypt, and they were given a separate kind of nearby land, Goshen, where they grew, and they became very, very numerous. But in time, Joseph died, and the Egyptians forgot about who Joseph was and the impact that he had, and they just kind of looked at these other people living in their midst as a problem. And so they forced slavery upon the Hebrew people. And they were slaves in Egypt for quite some time, almost 400 years of slavery. And then the Pharaoh at that time began to recognize that the Hebrews were actually growing so numerous that if at any point they decided we're done with this slave thing, they would have been completely able to overthrow the Egyptians just by sheer numbers. And so they ratcheted things up a little bit. And they began to say, hey, any male children need to be put to death. And so we're going to tell the midwives who deliver babies, you need to kill any male children born to the Israelites. Now, those midwives feared God more than they feared man. And they basically made up excuses for why they weren't able to do it. Well, that wasn't good enough for Pharaoh, so he began to round up children under the age of 2 by force and throw them into the Nile River. This was the command. Babies under the age of 2, male babies, thrown into the Nile River. It was a genocide. It was horrendous. And in the midst of that oppression, there was a couple named Amram and Jochebed. You're like, which one's which? Amram was the dude, and Jochebed was the chick. Just to clarify, right? So, they already had 2 children, Miriam and Aaron, and they conceived a 3rd child. Now, imagine carrying a child for 9 months, knowing that if, they don't have ultrasound, if this child is a boy, we're in big trouble. You want to talk about an anxiety-ridden pregnancy, right? Like like gender reveal, you're hoping for that girl, right? So when Jochebed gave birth to a boy, they kept it as much a secret as they could. And they managed to keep it a secret for 3 months, that they had a boy child in their home. And then she decided to hide baby Moses in the Nile River. Where he was supposed to have been put to die, she put him there in hopes that he could live. It's a scary genius plan, right? So she builds a waterproof basket. She hides him in the reeds along the banks of the Nile River, and she puts him in an area where the Egyptian royalty would often come to bathe. And technically, she had put him in the Nile, but Miriam, the older sister, was in charge of watching for Moses to be discovered. And at just the right moment, her plan was to appear and to say, hey, I will find a nurse for this baby if you want to keep this baby. And that's what happened. There was a princess to Pharaoh who came down, bathed in the water, found baby Moses, was enamored with him for whatever reason. He was supposedly beautiful. Scripture says that. And she was enamored with him, and she wanted to keep him. So Miriam says, hey, let me go get a woman to nurse him for you. And she's, okay, I'll pay them to nurse the baby. Well, then, of course, it was Moses' own mother that was paid to raise him for a few years. So Jochebed probably raised Moses until he was between 3 and 4 years of age. We don't know exactly what happened there, but we do know this. Psychologically now, we understand that those first 3 to 4 years are highly impressionable years for a child. Highly impressionable. So as she's teaching Moses about the Lord and teaching him about their faith and about their heritage, it left a powerful mark on him. Such a powerful mark that 35 years of Egyptian education couldn't erase it. We see evidence of that in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24. I just got a couple verses here that reference the story of Moses in the New Testament. It says, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Wow, that mom did her job. Think about this. Just side note, parents. the seeds we plant in a little child can produce fruit even in a hostile world. The toddler years are not meant to be survived. Right? That's how a lot of us look at the toddler years. It's like, oh, Lord, the terrible twos. Right? But they're very impressionable years. We got to be praying with those toddlers and modeling that. We got to be telling them the Bible stories and getting those things implanted into them. We got to be talking with them about how they have a purpose, that God loves them and made them for this time. And that probably goes beyond toddlers, right? All of us need to be telling young people, God made you for this time, to be a light in your dark generation. They're meant to be beacons. Okay, side note over. If you have a Bible, we're going to be right now, Exodus chapter 2. Follow along with me as Moses learns to walk with God. So at the set time, Moses was turned over to the princess, and that's when he received this Egyptian name, Moses. We don't know what his name was before Moses, but he was named Moses when he went to live in the palace. Exodus chapter 2, starting with verse 10, going through 15. Okay, the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, and he said, because I drew him out of the water. Now it came about in those days when Moses had grown up that he went out to his brethren, and he looked on their hard labors, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So, first thing we see, Moses witnesses an injustice. He sees something happening that shouldn't be happening. It's not okay. And it isn't hard to find injustice in our world today. You don't have to look very far. There's a lot of evil unfolding, and there are a lot of abuses happening. You know, we think of slavery as something that only happened a long time ago, like in Egypt, or maybe 200 years ago in American history as well, but that it's basically a thing of historical past. But the reality is, if you start digging into true statistics, there are more slaves in our world today than at any time in human history. More. A lot of that is sexual slavery. There are some estimates of as many as 8 million children that go missing every year. A lot of those undocumented. In addition to that injustice, then there's the millions that are aborted. Injustice abounds. What are we to do? Well, we can start with observing Moses and learn some things not to do. Moses has already lived through a genocide, right? He's already been a part of injustice in his world. And now he wants to see his people doing well. And they're being more mistreated. And the stakes keep getting higher. I think as he goes out to see what's happening, he's appalled. Probably didn't think it was as bad as it really is. So here you have Moses, a prince with power and influence, a man trained in combat and fighting, growing up in a world where the king is revered as a god. That's how it was in Egypt. And Moses is in line for that throne potentially. And yet he has a heart for these slaves because he knows they are his people. And his heart is in the right place, and he knows that this abuse is not good, and that these people are meant to be free. And we'll see in a moment, he even seems to know that God has chosen him for the job, but there are some very critical steps that are lacking for Moses. In the heart of the moment, Moses acts. In verse 12, it says, so he looked this way and that, and when he saw there was no one around, he struck down the Egyptian, and he hid him in the sand. Listen, God does care about injustice and suffering. There's mountains of Scripture that indicates God cares. And yet we don't see Moses consulting God regarding what should be done or by whom or when. So here's the deal. The right thing done the wrong way is the wrong thing. How do we know that Moses skipped this step of consulting God? Because before he takes action, he pauses to look around. Right? He looked around, but it doesn't say he looked up. Not that you have to look up to pray. But that was the missing step, right? He didn't stop to pray. He didn't go, God, what is my role here? What should I do? Often, we miss that step as well. How often do we look around, but we don't really take time to look up? If you're looking to see who's watching, you're probably not doing the right thing. Right? If you're doing the right thing, then it doesn't matter who sees you. Right? When was the last time you were embarrassed of doing the right thing? When you catch yourself looking around, you're probably headed down the wrong path. Because we don't need to be ashamed of doing right, of doing good. So instead of being led by God, it seems that Moses is being led by his flesh. We're never told that God commanded Moses, go kill that Egyptian. Even though his motives may have been pure, his methods certainly were not. It seems that Moses acted more impulsively. And he didn't realize what he was really doing until after it was done. Whenever we need to hide something, that's not a good sign. If you got to bury something, not good, right? When you find yourself being secretive, it's probably time to pump the brakes and stop and ask the question, why do I need to hide this? So without God leading and guiding Moses, chaos and confusion ensue. Verse 13 says, he went out the next day, and behold, 2 Hebrews were fighting with each other. And he said to the offender, why are you striking your companion? But that offender said, who made you prince and judge over us? Are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? And then Moses was afraid, and he said, surely this matter has become known. So Moses again shows up in the midst of a dispute, but apparently the person he had saved the day before didn't see things the way Moses saw things, right? He saw that he was rescuing that person, and yet they're reporting something very different to other people. Instead of seeing Moses as an ally that was there to protect them, he's perceived as what? Hot-tempered? Dangerous? A busybody sticking his nose where he doesn't belong? It wasn't good. And what's fascinating is Acts chapter 7, verse 25 sheds a little bit more light on what the breakdown was that occurred in this situation. So in Acts chapter 7, verse 25, you have Stephen, an early disciple, who's preaching a sermon to the Jews, and he begins to recount part of Moses' story in Acts, and he shares the miscommunication that broke down here. In verse 25, he says this about Moses, that he supposed that his brethren understood that God was granting them deliverance through him, but they did not understand. So instead of being a hero, Moses got painted as a villain even by his own people. And they are not the only ones confused. In verse 15 of chapter 2, it says that when Pharaoh heard the matter, he tried to kill Moses. Why? I mean, a prince probably could have got away with killing just about anybody they wanted. But this was treason. He was siding with the wrong side. It says that Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh, and he settled in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. That sums up a really probably difficult journey, right? It's like, yeah, he fled and then he sat down by a well. When you flee something, you're probably looking over your shoulder, trying to stay disclosed. You're keeping a low profile. Maybe don't light a campfire that night because no people are chasing after you, like that kind of stuff. It's like fugitive, right? By all accounts, Moses' plan to rescue his people was a complete failure. He killed one Egyptian, he freed no one, he lost his position, and he became a fugitive. Great job. Moses thought he was the one who could set his people free. He thought he was a somebody who could make a difference. And he was a dog on a walk charging ahead. It did not work out well for him. Moses lost everything. He had no place, no palace, no power, no authority, no people. He ended up in the wilderness at a well. It's like ending up at a rest stop. Not glamorous, right? He's at a rest stop licking his wounds. In the midst of this whole disaster, Moses suddenly realizes that he does not have what it takes. Question for us. How many disasters must we endure before we realize that our plans aren't very good? Psalm 127, verse 1, the psalmist says this. It's an important statement. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchmen keep awake in vain. When we don't walk in step with Jesus, we're probably creating more problems than we are creating progress. Right? Highly qualified and self-driven people, which is a highly esteemed thing in our culture, to be driven and qualified, but highly driven and qualified people seldom sit down long enough to get in tune with God. But when they finally can't take another step, God is there to revive us and give us new direction. When we come to the end of ourselves. Some of the most amazing things in my life have happened when I finally gave up and turned things over to God. It's been true with jobs. It's been true with my spouse. It's been true with my kids. It's been true with several different houses. It's been true with cars. It's been true with money. And dozens upon dozens upon dozens of difficult conversations when I'm like, Lord, I don't know what to do next with this. I'm just going to give it to you. And then God shows up. And it never stops being that way. I have a lot of things that I think God has still called me to do, and I have to stop forging ahead on my own and trust His timing, His way, His plan. And just walk in step with Him. Over time, I've had to learn to stop trying to make things happen, right? I need to do all that I can to be in a good position so that when God says go, I can go. When God says do this, I can do it. But when I try to make things happen, the wheels fall off again and again. The best position we can ever be in is to be in a position where we're ready with our eyes on Jesus. So that when He begins to move, we can move. It doesn't always make sense to everyone around us. But if you stay attentive to Jesus, we're watching Him, you'll see that He is faithful and His plans are good. Moses tried doing God's will, His way. It did not work out well. But we're never beyond what God can redeem, right? No matter how big of a mess you've made, we've all made messes, right? If we will stop and align ourselves with Him, He can change everything. So I got a question for you. I guess a series of questions. Is this story familiar for you? The outline of Moses' story? Have you initiated plans without seeking God? Have you found yourself doing things the wrong way? Have you experienced confusion and failure? Have you found yourself in unbearable conditions and running from the pain? There's good news. When we stop and rest and reflect and connect with Him, these tragic moments can be used to teach us how to walk in step with Jesus. If we will admit our error, which usually amounts to this, trying to be God, right? We try to be on the throne in our life. I try to be God. If we'll stop and go, you know what? This is your throne, God. I'm going to get off and you be in charge for a bit. Maybe forever. Then God can begin to show us how to walk with Him. We will learn not to charge ahead. We will learn not to get distracted, but to know God, to trust Him, to be attentive to Him, and then to walk in peace and contentment. It's a good place to be. It does take time. It starts when we let go of that throne and we begin to fix our eyes on Him. Lord God, thank You for these incredible instructions for us. Such important reminders. Maybe for some this is a completely different paradigm. It's looking at something different than ever before. God, we thank You for Your word that shines light on our human condition. We so quickly become impatient and misguided. But Lord, You invite us to walk with You. We don't have to figure everything out. We don't have to know everything. We just need to be near to You. Lord, when we wander off that path and things get crazy and horrible, thank You that You invite us with arms wide open. And You're ready to walk with us again. You don't ever abandon us. You aren't ever frustrated that we're picking ourselves back up one more time and trying again. You welcome us back. So Lord, I pray for humility on our end, that we would get out of the seat and let You have Your throne. Help us to be leaders in the places You put us. Help us to be beacons of light and hope in our dark world. And Lord, where we do see injustice, help us to be ready to listen and follow You in whatever ways You call us to intervene. Not forging ahead on our own, not dragging our feet, but walking in step with You. Continue to guide us and instruct us. Teach us. We pray it all in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. All right, so next week we dive into learning lessons through failure, and hope to see you again for that. If you are interested in, we're doing a class for newer Christians or people new here, kind of a new believer, newcomer class, a great opportunity to learn a little bit, get a little grounding under your faith, be able to ask questions and interact. If you're interested in that, we do need you to sign up today because we're going to be ordering curriculum tomorrow on that, and it'll start in a couple weeks on Monday evenings. So keep that in mind if that might be of interest to you. Other than that, if you want to have a hot dog and chips and hang out on the lawn with us, we're going to do that at 11:30. So come on back and hang out and have some food and fun. And we'll see you then. God bless.